All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Laura. I'm the chapter lead for Codecademy Seoul here in South Korea. And I'm here today with Danny, who is going to talk to us about Linux. And the way this is going to work, Danny has put together a presentation for us, which is going to take 35 minutes, give or take, after which we'll be taking questions from the audience. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the live chat and we'll do our best to answer them. Danny, over to you. If you could please introduce yourself and your
Right. Do it. Okay. Hi, I'm Dan. I live in the UK, based in London, and I'm a data engineer by profession. And I've been doing this for about 13, 15 years. So I'm quite honored to have been given this opportunity to be here to tell you a few things about this topic on why do developers prefer Linux. Let's get started. I'm just going to put out a screen share and launch. So, yep. Hello. I hope you're all well and safe. Hopefully, at the end of this session, you will have a couple of things to think about in your journey to becoming a developer. This is not a technical discussion. Just to remind yourself that. Also, we'll be taking it easy. Let's get started. If you don't already know Linux, that's okay. I can only guess that you are here because you want to know more about it and how it can benefit you in your projects or at work. So, choices. The images on either side must be a familiar scenario when you decide on your next brand new computer. In my opinion, the one on the right is far too expensive. So I can safely assume a large majority of us would settle for the one on the left. However, many developers I've come across have expressed their preference for the Mac for development. And I'm here to shed some light on why you should be aware of not one, but both systems, especially in the context of development. Well, the penguin is in between the two. But it doesn't exist in either machine. You have to go and get it. Hello, again, just a brief introduction. I'm Dan, and I've been teaching myself how to code, and I've been involved in numerous projects building applications, software developments, and data solutions for the past 13 years. I have worked within the Windows, Linux, and the macOS environment. I deal mainly with data. In my world, this is the ETL specialist, but it is now more glamorous to be known as data engineer. So that's who and what I am. Chances are that a large majority of you here are on the Windows operating system. You may have been using it for a while and may be comfortable making system changes, but on a minimal scale to be safe. If you're not, that's absolutely fine as well. I'm not here to call you out on that. And for the more advanced audience, if you are here, did you know that you can practically navigate Windows using just a keyboard? Forget the mouse. Can you believe it? Using Windows without a mouse? That would be quite an experience. There was a time the unthinkable happened. My inferior wireless pointing device, the mouse, had a heart attack. I was on Windows and I was completely paralyzed. I was unable to complete even the most basic task of browsing the internet for technical help. It was then I discovered keyboard shortcuts I never knew. And in retrospect, I was convinced to this day that a mouse can be made redundant most of the time. But for a better user experience, you know what to do. Keep it and make sure it's still alive. So, How is this short story any relevant to this topic? Well, again, I have worked on a number of interesting data projects. Depending on the project, I have found myself switching between operating systems, like the salsa dance. And I have found it particularly interesting as it is important to know exactly what must be done to set up a viable development environment on my machine and be ready to adapt. I'd like to point out here that knowing your OS means knowing how to set up your development environment. This means configuring applications, open source tools, text editors, which are easy and straightforward most of the time. This includes applications that you already know, as well as the ones you don't, because some companies have their own lists of approved softwares that can be installed onto your machine, that can only be installed onto your machine. This is typically big companies. However, doing them right at the start will save you from future headaches and mess. That's the difference. Just like the dance, if you were pulled out to the dance floor and it was your first time to salsa or dance of any kind, you will be like stiff, frozen, and may not even feel the limbs at all. I felt the same paralysis in a sense of not knowing what to do when I had to start a project on a provisioned MacBook. It was my first. You see, working in the IT in the UK, you are usually alone a machine when you join a company. So you'll never know what you're going to get. That's not a quote from, uh, what's that? Tom Hanks movie. Can't remember what it's like. Anyway, I don't know what it's like in other parts of the world, but perhaps one of you can tell me at the end of this session. I'll be very curious to know. So with that, it took me quite a while to get used to the new OS, let alone setting it up. After some time, I can say that I have had a positive experience because of my familiarity with Linux. Personally, I think it wasn't just about the MacBook or Linux, but more on customization. In other words, hackability. You see, I have seen firsthand Power developers move blocks of code, copy pasted, search and replace text, then jumps from line 35 to 1287 to insert a function and does the same thing all over again in different places, saves the changes, and immediately in another active terminal session, the unit testing for that script kicks off. When that task passes, in just a few more keystrokes, the code has been committed and pushed to its GitHub repository, all in a flash. Boom. The party was over within a minute, or what felt like a minute. The mouse wasn't even there, or wasn't even involved. It was fascinating to watch. And behind the scenes, all of that was made possible because of customization. I was like, whoa, that's productivity over the roof. It was unbelievable, truly. And the one thing that both the Mac and Linux have in common is the terminal. This is where you run bash commands, among other things. Depending on the specialization or your specialization, the developer can spend up to 65% of their time within the terminal, if not more. When you can hack your system and bend it to your will, so to speak, you will see your productivity improve, just like that developer. This includes automating some mundane tasks, creating terminal shortcuts, aliases, functions, scripting up preloaded environment, and many more. That guy had everything under his control. It's like magic. For an average user, when you look at him, you will not even have a clue what just happened. But if you were to peel it under the layers, if you were to examine, there are many things that have been automated. That's what this means. That it means that many keystrokes can be saved, which means it will save you time. Which means more time for you to focus on what's more important and solutionizing them, which means your delivery cadence goes up. There are many native tools or small applications in which are simple to use, customizable, and I dare say powerful. They are the command line applications that we have come to know and love. I'm referring to tools like the one listed here, uh, not find rich man, kill cat, but actually each of these is a keyword for an application. I just arranged them intentionally to, you know, yeah. So just like this one's here, and all of which the most seasoned developers know of and have exploited. And the beautiful thing about all these tools is that they can be chained together for sequential execution, all in one line. If you want to, you can create your own simple application this way to automate certain things. Just to mention quickly, the Mac OS is based on the BSD codebase, which is Unix. It is similar to the Linux system. However, they are not binary compatible. Okay, so because of the similarities between the Unix and the Linux distros, or the Linux, in other words, the macOS and the Linux distros, these tools are widely available in both operating systems. And when I say Linux here, excuse me, I'm also indirectly referring to the Mac. So as mentioned, you can customize your environment using property files, dot files, system and local environment paths, as well as creating environment functions to boost productivity and to automate certain repetitive tasks. There are documentation as well on how to use each of these tools from the terminal if you just need to be reminded. Just to highlight other favorites, on the Mac, you can add new workspaces and swipe sideways to them. This allows you to better organize your open applications and helps you focus on your thoughts depending on which workspace you are in. So emails, for me, emails and messaging in one space, text editors and coding application in another space, the web browser in the other space, depending on how you want to organize it. Yeah. So similarly, you can find multiple virtual desktop environments in Linux as well, depending on the chosen desktop environment when you install it, such as the KDE, uh, GNOME, and others. Oh, there's also launching application by typing it out. I think this didn't happen until Windows 7, thanks to development in Linux distro and macOS. And last but not least, the availability and accessibility of numerous open source softwares at the touch of your fingertips. Just key them into the terminal. You get it. No end user license agreement buttons to read and click anymore. It must have been ages ago since I last saw Eula. She wasn't nice. It was always her way or the highway. If you're like me, If you're like me, stuck on a technical problem, I'll consult Stack Overflow, or at least if I'll type that out in a search engine. Uh, Most of the time, the Stack Overflow result will come up to the top. It's where we all go to. Again, depending on the problem you're trying to solve. In my area of expertise, those responses are almost always going to be a command line explanation. They are a more direct resolution, just as a doctor would prescribe a drug for your ailment. So Windows has not really been popular among developers. It has a reputation of being unstable and unreliable. Now, emphasis here is that this may no longer be the case, but its stained reputation has remained stubborn to come off the mind. Don't get me wrong, because I am also aware and know of developers developing only within the Windows ecosystem and would raise a finger at Linux and the Mac. So, which Linux, you may ask? Can I install Linux? No, because there isn't a Linux OS to install, but you can choose a Linux distribution for installation. For example, there are at least 7 categories and hundreds of distros available to be had. I will not discuss them here, just take a look. All free and available, except for the Red Hat and some of its variant. If you look at this, is a Slackware category, and it's got like, I don't know, like tens or at least 50 of them. It is arranged by timeline from 1992 to up to today. And the line extends beyond 2018, which means they're still available here. The Debian stack or the variant has got a lot of this distros. And each of them, if you go to their website, you can download and install them. Yeah. Okay. So what I want to say here is this. Over the decades, I noticed the shift towards adaptations of Linux-like features on Windows. I believe this was not just a strategic move to recapture some developers they may have lost over time in terms of market share, but more on the point of recognition on the fact that Linux is more efficient by comparison. I do not hope to see my Windows get thrown eggs and tomatoes for making this statement. But anyway, it really depends on the need and requirements for the project. If I'm honest, Linux wins most of the time. So what does it mean for you? What are Linux-like features? The ones that immediately comes to mind are launching your applications by typing them out after pressing the Windows key. Recent addition of the Windows subsystem for Linux, that you didn't know this. Then there's the terminal, specifically PowerShell, not the CMD, which is DOS, multiple desktop workspaces, like those on the Mac machines. This was since Windows 10, about 6 years ago. And then there's this free-for-all package management. You know, like on the Mac, you can get the homebrew, which is free, access the homebrew to access most open source applications, if not all. So, oh, by the way, there are a lot of things that can be done, or actually are done and achieved through the terminal. It's a very important feature for within Linux. So, like I said, these are the similarities. Okay, and just to remind ourselves, this is a non-technical, also keeping them non-technical. These are all high-level similarities. So, how do you get into it? How do you get started if you haven't already? You can run it on VirtualBox or VMware. Download the distro's image and load it up in there. It's the non-destructive way of having another OS virtualized within Windows. When you are more comfortable with Linux and have found yourself spending more time with open source projects, or just wants to hack, consider dual booting. You can always boot back to Windows, or boot Windows out completely and just put a Linux distro in it, or 2, or 5 if you want. Or get a MacBook if you can afford it. And please do not install Windows there. I shall not say it's a dumb thing to do. Nope, I haven't said it. Ubuntu is widely supported and has a strong community base there. It is one of the most popular Linux desktop distro out there, so you can start looking over there. I'm not here to convince you to ditch Windows entirely, no, but rather question on how fast you can adapt and switch without loss of productivity if or when situation changes, but you're not familiar with that situation. Or if the project that you are interested in is of an open source collaborative, but you don't have the proper environment. Or if your production environment is not a Windows ecosystem and you have problems deploying to it because your machine is Windows. what would you do? You can certainly resist change and insist on the one thing that you're already familiar with. There is absolutely no problem with that. But I want you to be flexible, adaptable, fluid-like, welcome changing environments because the software, web development landscape, or development in general that involves code is definitely always changing. Their backend production ecosystem is almost consistently a Linux distro of some kind. If you're not already if you're not already in a Windows ecosystem, then it has to be Linux. There is a high chance that you will be interacting with it via SSH, API, Docker, or the others. So get familiar with Bash scripting and the command line operations. They will be your friends. Learn how to use a terminal. Be that power user. It will be like magic to all. Give yourself the option, the ability to approach any project, open source or not the software or the operating system choosing you. Enable yourself with the experience of knowing the other world of OS. This way, you can increase your prospect for employability, community collaborations, productivity, and efficiency in software development. Oh, yes, I mentioned the Windows subsystem for Linux, WSL in short. This way, you could it has been around for about 5 years and got a major update in May 2019, WSL2, which offers better performance and user experience. So without getting too much into details, this is Windows with a Linux terminal, among other things. Have to think why that is. In short, it's all about security, the terminal, and the open source applications, which are free. These are the ones that I want to highlight among others. No Microsoft Office on Linux? It's true, there isn't one. Not a problem. There is an open source version for just like Office, and it works just as good. And it can also save the files out in Word compatible files. DOC or is it DOCX? Yeah, and the likes. So I would also say to always look for alternatives to the ones that you are familiar with already. Be curious and test out competitor software, both paid as well as open source counterparts. Know how to configure them correctly and observe best practices. I have an interest in photography. I do a lot of photo editing and post-production works. When I decide that I don't want to pay for Adobe subscription fees anymore, which can sometimes run up to more than $100 a year, I know for a fact that I can always fall back to using the Darktable and GIMP, GIMP, for Linux. They are the equivalent of Adobe's Lightroom and Photoshop, respectively. The best thing about that, it still does exactly what I want. This is just to illustrate that there are alternatives. Of course, Photoshop, in my experience so far, is far more superior. But I don't take advantage of all the power features to justify for the subscription cost. So yes, the items to take away from here today about the topic we've discussed so far are the terminal and the fact that everything is customizable. Almost everything. I think of it as having a Pandora box, which can enable me to do a lot more, a smarter way of working. And this is why I believe developers prefer Linux. Here is some food for thoughts. Did you know that devices and applications around the world runs on the Linux backend? The US DoD uses Linux extensively, and the Red Hat runs the nuclear submarines. Did you know that Linux is favored by the FANGs tech giants like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. Did you know also that 99% of the top fastest supercomputers of the world runs on Linux or its variants? Even Microsoft themselves contributes to Linux kernel development. I'm definitely not suggesting hacking into a certain government's defense infrastructure as your open source projects. Please don't do that. So back to choices. What's it gonna be? A Windows machine or a MacBook, or in the one in between? Get a Linux if you're curious about your development, or is maybe I see it as a step towards the world of Linux. If you're ever curious about getting a MacBook but don't know how to use it yet, but don't want to spend that much money yet, try out Linux. I'll suggest you to try out Linux. And that's it. I'm happy to take any questions you may have or dodge them.
Nice. Thank you, Danny. And thank you, Laura, for bringing Danny over. That was an amazing presentation. We actually had a lot of questions going on through the chat, so I'm going to go through it now and look at them. The latest one comes from DDL SDS, and he was wondering if these users starting front-end web development, and he's wondering if Linux is going to help them much on front-end web development. What do you think, Danny?
Sorry, can you please repeat?
Do you think that if you are a web developer, you should be worrying about things like, am I using Linux? Am I using Mac? Am I using Windows? Is this for that kind of developer, like a web developer, is that an important choice to make?
I don't believe it should be a worry at all. But the point of all this session is to raise awareness that you should also be aware that there are other environments that you can take advantage of that could enhance your experience in development. Because these days developments are mostly they're code agnostics. It is the point here is that the terminal can give you a lot more different ways to work more efficiently. So if you have been very comfortable in the development in the web development, then please continue. But also, I'm asking you to be curious on what it's like in your workflow in another environment. See if you can achieve the same thing. I'm sure you could, but see if you can work better in another environment. This is more like an insurance. If in the event that you wanted to change that, and you can move across it quite fast, right?
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Do you mind stop sharing your screen so we show our faces back to the audience?
I've been trying to find where Zoom is, so stop share. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Another question up here was when you show the graph with all the distros over time, somebody was wondering if there was any major differences between distros or anything that they should know about when choosing one distro over another.
Yes, every distro is unique to the other one. As I mentioned, if you're not sure where to start, the safest choice is to go for the distro that has the largest community support, and the names that immediately comes to mind are Ubuntu, X Ubuntu, as well as Debian. These are all the desktop distros that you can pick and start with. If you have any question, you can just type into your favorite search engine, and you get a lot of support from community forums on how to do certain things. And that's also the best place to start your exploration there. And the thing is, the one common thing, as I mentioned, all the distros have the terminals in them that you can take advantage of. If you do not have to take advantage of the terminal, that's okay. You can use the Linux distro just as your Windows, just as anything to do your daily task.
I think it's my first experience with the different kinds of distros happened when I started using a Raspberry Pi. And I realized that because it's running on an ARM architecture, the Raspbian that I was running, that distro was a little different than the Ubuntu I was running on my Windows machine, or my desktop. So I think it was different, and it was fun also to just learn that there was little quirks, little commands that weren't the same. There were certain applications or tools that were a little different. So I think the point that you were making earlier about how it's all about exploring your options and being flexible about the tools you use, that's a really good point. And I mean, if you're going to be a developer, if you're in the chat right now, and you're thinking about being a developer, you're trying to learn to be a developer and get into tech, being curious about the tools that you use, it's going to be a key factor to your success professionally. So don't be afraid of using tools. I think that's a great key takeaway from today. Let's see. Somebody in the chat was wondering, if I primarily use Mac for development, would you still use Linux on the same machine? Okay, so you have a MacBook. What are the reasons why you would go for Linux when you already have Unix running on your MacBook? Okay. Can you think of any specifics?
No, because those who can afford a MacBook already would not think of anything else. As I mentioned in my earlier, when I say Linux, I'm also kind of indirectly referring to the Mac. So once you're there and you know your experience, you know your ways around your environment, and you're comfortable with it already. That's fine, because even I have asked the question myself with my friends and other developers. Hey, I see that you're using Mac. Would you be able to do what you are doing right now as efficient if you were to set it up in a Windows machine? You're like, nah, I won't even consider it. So they
yeah, that makes sense. Sometimes it's not even your choice, right? I know that companies, sometimes you get onboarded and they say, well, we are a Mac shop, we are a Mac office, so here's your laptop, your work laptop, and it's a Mac. So sometimes for developers, it's the first time with a Mac. Like you said, they've been learning on Windows their entire life, maybe using Linux, and now they have a Mac, and they have to learn the way of the Mac. And I'm sure that some of them will the first thing that they do is try to revert it back to as much as Linux as they can.
Yes, and this is where I begin to discover the WSL. It's a wonderful tool, and I thought this is like Windows on crack, really, because now you have a Windows and you have the Linux terminal within it, and both of them works seamlessly well together, and it gives me the Linux experience, the Linux terminal experience, as well as being like on a Mac machine. Yeah, because I do everything within I use the terminal a lot as well. Yeah.
It's I think somebody's asking here a question about, they're asking the advantage of Linux over the terminal, and I'm assuming that what they mean is terminal, the app on Mac. So I think Mac terminal, does it runs Bash or
Yes.
Or does it run? So I would imagine that the Mac terminal and the Linux terminal are fairly close.
They are fairly close because they are based on the Unix kernel, if I remember correctly. They are similar, but both environments are, as I mentioned, they are not binary compatible. However, just on the terminal alone, they are very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And somebody else is asking, can Windows terminal work like Unix? No. So I'm assuming that the question there is, does DOS work like Unix?
No. Personally, don't hold me up on this against me. personally, I think this is the reason why a lot of us developers move away to leave Windows and go to either a MacBook or Linux, because of the flexibility, the robustness of the terminal in the Linux environment is far more superior than what CMD DOS can offer. Until the time when they came out with PowerShell, and when I saw PowerShell, I'm like, I can't even understand it. But then years later, they came out with the WSL, which means now I can run Linux commands exactly like Bash commands in Windows.
So it's not so much that Windows got better; they just borrowed the tools. So,
which is why I highlighted there are a lot of Linux-like features that I'm beginning to see between these systems. So again, back to the point where I said it is important, or it is beneficial for you to know or to recognize that these are the features in each of these system, and if you already know them, then for you to transition from one to the other is quite fast and easy because you recognize it.
Mhm. I think someone is wondering if PuTTY on Windows would be better than using SSH on Linux. I'm not familiar with performance indices or if there's any particulars.
PuTTY is an application that really allows you to tunnel into a Linux environment, which is the terminal. And once you're connected and tunnel into it, you will be running Bash commands, which is why I mentioned it is useful, beneficial for you to be familiar with Bash commands or the command line applications, because then you'll be using there's very high chances that you'll be interacting with them. I moved from on-premise development to cloud-based development implementations right now, and a lot of them I have to connect remotely through the SSH tunnels and run Bash commands really. So yeah, it's not to say that one is better than the other, but that PuTTY application tunnels into the Linux backend.
So I guess it's sort of a hidden question. When you are trying to compare PuTTY with SSH, you're talking about the same thing. It's just presented different to the user, and maybe users don't realize what's going on behind the scenes when you're running PuTTY.
Yeah. So because now with the WSL, I can install Linux there, and it gives me the terminal. I don't have to use PuTTY.
Mm-hmm. It's built in.
Exactly.
Lara, do you have any questions for Danny that maybe you prepare ahead of time, or am I cutting into your time?
You're on mute.
Actually, no, I think you've pretty much answered everything I was curious about, but I just wanted to know, can you just remind me again, which distribution or distributions are you currently using yourself? And what's your work experience been like? So what distributions have you been getting from the companies that you work for? Is there like a pattern or something you can share?
The very first one that I have interacted with is CentOS, which is based on a Red Hat variant, which is mainly implemented for their servers. Yeah, and at the time I had to use the Ubuntu distro. They're compatible in one way or another. There isn't much of a problem in terms of experience anyway. So my experience with Ubuntu has been great so far, although admittedly it has been quite a challenge to learn coming from Windows. And I have tried all the steps. Going through the VirtualBox and then dual booting, and then now I've completely left Windows, and for more than 5 years now, I haven't really even looked back. I have also now, in the last few months, I think recently, I've tried a new distro called Garuda. It's based on an Arch Linux architecture, which is really different from Ubuntu. But it's a very beautiful GUI it's very pretty to look at. But in terms of building out softwares or installing some applications in that, it's a little different from what I'm used to within Ubuntu. You're on mute.
No, I was wondering if I was just giving Laura some time for more questions.
No?
Yeah, people, the chat just keeps going back and forth. I think a lot of people are just like, they keep comparing systems and trying to figure out which one is the best. I think that's the nature of the internet. We're always looking for rankings and who's the best of what.
Well, I think the
so-
question here, if I may interject here, is yes, it may seem relevant to find the best, but I think what's more practical is to choose the one that is more relevant to you, and then make the best out of it. If whatever your use case is doesn't fit into the one that you have chosen, explore another one, right? Until you find something that's more suitable. But I do not imagine that you would have explored like 10, more than 5 or more than 10. It usually is within a handful of choices that you've made, and that you will make the most out of it. It's practicality is best for the use case, not necessarily the best software out there.
It's I think I had a professor once while I was going to college that explained it, saying, look, when you look at racing, they all have different kinds of tires for different environments. You wouldn't ask a driver to have the same set of tires for every race in every condition. And you have to think of operating systems this way. You don't think about them which one is the best. They all have the role and they all have the tools. And you just have to figure out what you're doing and where the tools are better for you.
Yeah.
So I guess it all keeps coming back to flexibility. I think if anyone walks away today with one lesson, is be flexible.
Yeah. True enough. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think anybody is having any other major questions. Someone is wondering about security and if distros have different levels of security. I would imagine that they are all more or less similar when we're talking about Linux distributions.
Yeah, it is. In my opinion, and I'm sure the Linux community will also agree, much of this is that it is very secure. Personally, like I said, I've been using Linux for more than 10 years right now. And if we're talking about virus, or having some kind of antivirus software that runs on it, I don't have one, and I don't have to worry about one. But also, be mindful that it also depends on what websites and what you're downloading. Of course, you can download a virus without knowing, but be mindful where you go and what you download, and be aware of cybersecurity these days. The topics of cybersecurity, what you get. If you're just doing development work, searching for answers, resolutions, or searching for ideas, working on projects, working well with open source collaborations, generally you don't have to worry about viruses. It is also secure because there's the super user, the root password. Only you know. Any applications or malware that wants to make changes to your system will have to have your root password.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. I remember setting up Windows where the administrator of the machine would be by default the person that was installing the OS. And I remember someone saying what you should do is create a second user and always be running out of that restricted user. Because if your main user gets compromised on Windows, you are the root of Windows. So you have a problem if that user gets compromised. So even though it sounds counterintuitive that you own the machine and you want to be in a restricted user, there's several advantages why you would want to be in that state and only allow for high permissions in certain occasions. That's a thing root, that Linux has been doing for so long. Yeah,
exactly. Root is like being the god of your file system, and there can only be one god in your environment, which is you. Right. No, everybody else, no access. You want to make changes to some system files, no access unless you type in a password. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think we can finish with one last question that came through the chat, and it's about someone is wondering if anyone can make edits or contribute to Linux, wouldn't that make it less secure?
There is a point here. However, because it's a community-driven development, there are organizations or basic community that checks, peer review your codes, and there's always the people who will be scrutinizing the way codes are written, and if there are any issues that are highlighted, it will always be patched and fixed. And Ubuntu or the Linux system is quite good at updating their system regularly and addressing any security issues in the background as well. So this is where my confidence with the system lies on.
In fact, you could make the argument that it is more secure than closed systems, because in closed systems like Windows, they have to depend on their engineers finding bugs and fixing them and patching security flaws. While in places like Ubuntu Linux, a community of tens of thousands or millions of people, the likelihood of them discovering these vulnerabilities and fixing them quicker than a private company would, I've heard that point before, where it would say, big companies like Microsoft only have so many engineers in their staff, and they only have so much time to find errors or bugs or vulnerabilities. But the community, it's millions around the world in all time zones, and they can find problems all the time much more quickly. So I've actually heard the argument that it is more secure precisely because everybody's contributing, not the other way around, not less secure because everyone's contributing.
That is a very, very good point. Thank you.
Peter, do you use Linux at Codecademy, or is that not something you can talk about?
We have Macs at Codecademy, and I know that most people use Linux for the backend. So it's a mix of both. Yeah, it's kind of like what Danny was saying. Once you're in a Mac Unix environment, it becomes kind of like a very fuzzy gray line. Are you on Unix? Are you on Linux? Are you it's all becomes sort of the same thing. So that's how we run. I know that we have some engineers that have Windows machines laying around so that we make sure that Codecademy, the website, runs well in Internet Explorer and other browsers that might be Windows only or Windows specific. But most of the time, people are running Google Chrome or Firefox, which are browser engines that run pretty much the same based on
Exactly.
on Linux, Mac, and Windows. So that's been really helpful for development because Edge, even Microsoft Edge now runs on Chromium, which is the same technology that Chrome uses. So it's becoming all sort of the same thing. Instead of having to develop for 10 different systems, you're developing for 2 or 3 now.
I remember reading that Chrome OS is actually a Linux distro, type Linux distro.
I wouldn't be surprised. Just based on whole Chrome OS, yeah. I mean, Google likes Linux for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
Laura, I mean, if we don't have any other questions, so whatever you want to do next, you want to wrap this up?
Yeah, I think we can pretty much finish. So thanks everyone for attending. Thanks Danny and Fede for your time, especially Fede for waking up extra early today.
Well, yeah, he's based in New York. It's like 5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you.
Right, thanks.
No problem. Thanks everybody. Yeah. Danny, you want to send them off? Any last words of wisdom about Linux? Anything that you would like to share? Parting thoughts.
Parting thoughts. I think the point I'm trying to make here is really to enable yourself and be flexible when it comes to development, and do not shy away from changing environments. I have experiences myself, as I mentioned in the when I gave the analogy of like a salsa dance. I was completely frozen because I was given a MacBook. And it took me quite a while to get used to things over there, but my Linux experience did help me to continue my delivery quite faster, quicker. So yeah, enable yourself, be flexible, don't shy away from challenges or unknown areas softwares and be curious. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Well, thank you again, everybody, for stopping by. And hopefully we'll bring people back soon live on our YouTube channel and keep learning all together. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.